The barn smelled like sweat, whiskey, and old hay, the kind of place where trouble learned to walk before it could talk. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting a yellow, smoky light over the crowd. Men in dust-stained coats leaned against posts, boots hooked on railings, silver coins clinking in their hands like restless thoughts. Laughter rose and fell in mean little bursts, the kind that had nothing to do with joy. Boone Tate stood at the back, hat low, shoulders hunched into his coat. He hadn't come for this. He'd ridden in for feed and a coil of rope, maybe a quiet drink if the bottle looked clean, but a whisper at the livery. Auction tonight out at Miller's barn. Had reached the wrong part of his conscience. He told himself he was only curious. That's what men say when they know they're already ashamed. At the front of the barn, a plank table served as a makeshift block. A man with greasy hair and a leather vest banged on it with a stick. "Next lot," he shouted. "Got ourselves something special, boys." Two men dragged her out from the shadows. Lila stumbled when they yanked her forward, bare wrist bound in front with a frayed rope. Her dress, what was left of it, was torn at the hem and spattered with mud. A bruise darkened along her jaw like a thumbprint the night refused to forget. The lantern light found her face, and the barn went quieter than Boone liked. She held herself straight anyway. That was the first thing he noticed. Not the ropes, not the way her lip trembled for half a heartbeat and then stilled. It was the way she refused to curl in on herself for their benefit. Her eyes swept the room once, slow and careful, like a woman counting wolves. "Black gal, strong back," the auctioneer crowed. "Picked her up after that mess on the trade road. No brand, no papers, so she's clean as what you make of her. Startin' at $1. A ripple of laughter. Someone whistled low. A coin flashed in the light. Boone's jaw clenched. He'd heard about the ambush on the road. Wagon train attacked. Survivors scattered. Folks in town talked about it like weather. Bad, but distant. Nobody seemed too troubled by the way certain men started showing up with strays they aimed to sell. $1, the caller said. "Do I hear one?" A hand went up near the front. "Dollar here." $1.10? $1.20, someone else called, voice thick with drink. Boone shifted his weight. The wood post at his back felt like a brand. He told himself to walk out. He'd buried one woman already. He wasn't about to drag another into his mess of a life. The ranch was quiet now, and he'd made his uneasy peace with that silence. $1.50, the caller pushed, grinning. "Boys, look at her. You ain't gonna find shoulders like that in no town seamstress." Laughter again. Lila's gaze flicked toward the back of the barn. Just once. Just enough. Their eyes met. In that moment, Boone saw more than a lot. He saw exhaustion in the set of her shoulders, defiance burning beneath it. He saw the raw edge of fear in her eyes, and something even sharper behind it, shame that didn't belong to her but had been forced on her like a ragged dress. He'd seen that look once before. On his wife's face, the night fever took her, and she begged him not to let her die in a stranger's bed. $1.75, a man in a brown coat said, nudging his friend with an elbow. "Reckon my yard could use some cleaning." "You ain't got a yard," the friend laughed. "Just dirt and empty bottles." Boone heard his own voice before he decided to use it. "20, he said. The word dropped into the room like a stone in a still pond. Heads turned. The caller's smile widened. $20 from the back. Now we talkin'." "Do I hear 25? No one answered. The men near the front looked at Boone, and then at Lila, and then at each other, something sour sliding behind their eyes. $20 was a heavy cost, but it was too much for a man to spend on a woman he wasn't planning to use. Boone felt the weight of their assumptions settle on him like dust. The auctioneer lifted his stick. "Going once?" Lila stared at Boone as if trying to see through the brim of his hat, past the hard set of his mouth, into the part of him he didn't show anybody anymore. Going twice, Boone could have backed down, could have coughed, muttered that he'd misspoke, let some other bastard take her and walk out of that barn with his conscience scuffed but intact. The world would keep turning. Men would keep doing what men do when no one tells them to stop. "Sold!" the caller barked, slamming the stick against the table. $20 to the quiet cowboy in the back. The barn erupted. Some laughed, some muttered. One man near the front spat on the floor. "Well now," someone drawled, "didn't figure Boone Tate for that kind of company." Boone ignored them. He stepped forward, boots thudding in the straw, and reached into his coat. $20 in coin hit the table with a soft metallic clink. "Untie her," he said. The seller, a lanky man with red-rimmed eyes, smirked. "Careful with this one, Tate. She's got more fire than sense." Boone looked at the rope around her wrists. "So do I." He took a knife from his belt and sliced the rope loose. Lila flinched when the fibers snapped, then drew her hands back to her chest, rubbing at the angry marks they'd left. For a moment she didn't move. The barn felt too bright and too small, filled with eyes that wanted to see what she'd do next. Boone shrugged out of his coat and draped it over her shoulders. It hung heavy and warm around her, nearly swallowing her frame. The smell of tobacco, leather, and clean sweat replaced the sour stench of the barn. "Can you walk?" he asked, voice low enough that only she could hear. She lifted her chin a fraction. "Been doing it my whole life." It was the first time he heard her voice. It carried a tired kind of pride that made his chest tighten. He nodded toward the doors. "Come on, then. You're leaving this place with me." He turned without waiting for her answer, trusting she'd follow or she wouldn't. Boots shifted behind him. A few men moved aside. A few didn't. Boone let his hand rest near the butt of his gun in a way that said he didn't have much left to lose. Outside, the night was cold but honest. The sky hung low and hard with stars, the moon a thin silver hook over the dark line of the ridge. His horse stamped and snorted, breath steaming. He helped her up into the saddle, then swung up behind, careful not to crowd her, but close enough that if she slipped, she wouldn't fall far. As they rode away from the barn, the sound of laughter and clinking bottles faded into the dark. But Boone could feel eyes on his back, even after the lantern light disappeared. $20 was a heavy cost. But as Lila sat rigid in front of him, wrapped in his coat and the faint smell of smoke from her past, Boone Tate knew he'd bought himself more than a stranger's trouble. He'd just drawn a line between himself and the town, and whether he meant to or not, he'd done it for her. The road from Miller's barn was little more than a strip of frozen mud and moonlight. Lila didn't speak. Not once, not even when the wind cut at her cheeks like brittle glass. Boone didn't expect her to. A woman who'd been dragged into a room like that, she didn't give her voice away easily. The horse's hooves struck rhythm across the hard ground. Steady and sure, Boone kept his hands loose on the reins, aware of every tiny shift of her body in front of him. She sat rigid at first, shoulders high, breath shallow. But after a mile or two, she eased, only a fraction, the smallest surrender. But it was enough to tell him she was human and exhausted, not broken. They crossed the ridge just as the moon slipped behind a thin veil of cloud. Boone's ranch sat below, low and quiet against the land. A modest cabin, a weathered barn, and a split-rail fence that sagged in places he hadn't felt like fixing. It wasn't much, but it was safe, or safer than the place he'd taken her from. As they rode into the yard, Lila stiffened again. "What is this place?" she asked, voice rough as sanded wood. "My home," Boone said. "Just me. Been that way a long while." He swung down first, boots sinking into cold dirt. When he offered a hand, she hesitated. Not long, but long enough for him to see fear and pride wage war across her face. "I can get down," she said quietly. Didn't say you couldn't. His voice came out softer than he meant. She placed her fingers in his palm anyway. Her hand was cold, ice cold, and trembled faintly as he helped her to the ground. The moment her boots touched earth, she swayed, knees buckling from exhaustion. Boone caught her before she fell. Her breath hitched, fear, humiliation, maybe both, but he let go as soon as she stood steady, stepping back to give her space. Storm's comin', he said, nodding toward the cabin. You'll freeze out here. She pressed her lips together, then followed him to the porch. He pushed open the door, letting warm lamplight spill across the snow-dusted yard. The cabin smelled of pine smoke, old oak, and the faint ghost of coffee. It was tidy in the way loneliness makes men tidy. Everything in place because no one else was around to move it. She hovered in the doorway, one hand clutching his coat around her shoulders. You can step in, he said, removing his hat. Ain't no trap. I know better than to take a man at his word. Her voice was quiet, but the truth in it was heavy. Boone nodded once, slow. Fair enough. He stepped aside, letting her enter on her own terms. Lila crossed the threshold like a woman stepping into a memory she wasn't sure belonged to her. The warmth hit her first, real warmth, not the breathless heat of fear, but the soft, even burn of a well-tended fire. She moved toward the hearth, hands stretched out. He noticed then how torn her dress was, how the skin at her wrists was raw where the ropes had rubbed. Boone took a steadying breath, crossed to the cupboard, and pulled out a tin cup. You hungry? He asked. She didn't turn. Don't need charity. Wasn't charity, was a question. A long pause. Then, quietly, yes. He ladled stew into a bowl, beans, a scrap of ham, potatoes boiled down soft. Simple food, but warm. She took it with both hands, as if afraid it might disappear if she blinked too long. She ate in small, cautious bites, standing by the fire like her feet didn't trust the floor. Boone leaned against the table, watching the way she held the spoon, like she'd forgotten how to eat slow. The bed's through that door, he said after a moment, nodding toward a partition near the back wall. Floor's fine for me in here. She froze mid-bite. That's kind of you, she said carefully. Too carefully. But why? Boone shrugged a shoulder. Storm's getting worse, and you've been through enough for one night. That's not what I meant. Her eyes lifted to his, and they caught him, sharp and assessing. Why did you pay for me? You didn't look like the others. No, he said quietly. I'm not. That's not an answer, she said. Boone met her gaze fully then. For years, folks in town had said his eyes were the hardest thing about him, storm gray with no sunlight left behind them. Tonight, for reasons he didn't care to touch, they softened. You look like someone who didn't deserve to stand in that room, he said. Her breath hitched again, but not from fear this time. I never asked for saving, she whispered. No, Boone said, but that didn't mean I could walk away. Silence thickened between them, warm, uneasy, alive. After a moment, Lila set the bowl aside, clutching the coat tighter. I can work, she said suddenly, to earn my keep. I can clean, mend, cook proper if you got the ingredients, and I ain't afraid of chores. Boone exhaled slowly. You don't have to earn nothing, she drew herself taller. Men don't spend money on women for nothing. He swallowed, hard. That so? Boone asked. It always been so, she meekly answered. Boone looked at her, his gaze steady. If you're going to be under my roof, I'm not calling you woman. She tilted her chin up. It's Lila. A ghost of a nod from him. Boone. She didn't speak the name, but held his eyes. A transaction made, a piece of control returned to her. Boone stepped toward her, but not close enough to touch, just close enough to lower his voice. "Lila, I didn't buy you. I bought your freedom." Her mouth parted, surprise cracking through her guarded expression. But before she could speak, a sharp howl of wind slammed against the cabin walls, shaking loose snow from the roof and rattling the shutters. Boone glanced toward the window, jaw tensing. Storm clouds rolled thick over the ridge, swallowing the moonlight. "You'll be here a while," he said, "long as it takes for the weather and trouble to settle." Lila watched him for a long moment. A man with a limp in one leg, a ring-shaped, sun-bleached mark on his finger where a promise once lived, and a sadness he tried to wear quiet. A man who didn't ask her for anything, who didn't look at her like she owed him her body or her gratitude or her silence, only warmth, only shelter, only safety. Her voice broke softly when she finally answered, "Then I'll stay." Boone nodded once, the smallest sigh leaving him. "For tonight," she added quickly. He almost smiled. "We'll see," he murmured. Outside, the storm descended like a curtain across the land, cold, relentless, and unforgiving. Inside, the cabin held its own warmth, two strangers standing between a fire and a night that wanted to take them both. By morning, the storm had settled into a steady, whispering snow, soft flakes drifting sideways across the yard like the sky was thinking instead of raging. Boone brewed coffee. Lila kept her distance, hands wrapped around the warmth of her cup as if it were the first thing that had held her gently in months. It should have been quiet. It wasn't. Because out of the silence came the distant thud of hooves. Lila nearly dropped her cup. Boone didn't flinch, didn't even look at her, just reached for the rifle leaning by the door. "Stay behind me," he said. "Is it them?" Her voice cracked like a frozen branch. I doubt they'd announce themselves with hooves. Two riders crested the small rise at the edge of the yard, snow clinging to their coats. Boone relaxed by a breath when he recognized them. "It's fine," he said. "It's just the Miller boys." She didn't look convinced, and she wasn't wrong to be afraid. The Miller boys weren't outlaws. They were worse in another way, men who followed the rules when they favored them and ignored them when they didn't. Boone opened the door but didn't invite them in. "Snow's deep," he said. "What brings you out this way?" The older Miller leaned from his saddle, eyes sliding past Boone to the shadowed figure inside. "Heard you picked up something at the auction last night." Boone's jaw tightened. "Heard wrong." "Did I?" Miller tipped his hat, the gesture more insult than politeness. "'Cause folks in town say you paid for a woman, a colored one." Lila stiffened inside the cabin. Boone didn't move. "I brought someone out of a bad place. That's all anyone needs to know." The younger Miller spit into the snow. "Ain't your business saving strays?" "Make it your business," Boone said calmly, "and we'll have a different kind of conversation." The older Miller laughed softly, the humorless sort. "We just came to tell you folks are talking, sheriff included. Don't go acting like you're above the rest of us." Boone nodded once. Message received. The men rode off, leaving tracks that cut across the yard like fresh scars. Boone closed the door, leaned the rifle back in its place, and turned to find Lila staring at him. "You said I'd be safe here." "You are," he said. She shook her head. "Not from them. Not from talk. You're going to suffer on account of me." He studied her, really studied her. The way her shoulders curled inward like she'd been bracing for blame long before he showed up in her story. "Lila," he said quietly, "you didn't bring trouble. It came looking. All I did was open the door." She didn't know how to answer that, so she looked away instead. Boone saddled the horse. "Coming with me?" he asked. Lila blinked. "Into town? Need supplies. Weather's turning again. Can't leave you here with a fire and a hope." She hesitated. A lifetime of being taken only where she was told made the question feel strange and sharp. Yes, she said. Town was a valley of whispers waiting to happen, wooden storefronts half buried in snow, smoke curling from chimneys, people bundled in coats, leaning out of doorways for a look, and look they did. Women stepped aside. Men stared openly. A whisper rose behind them like a draft beneath a door. That's her. He bought her, I swear he did. Wild, ain't it? Tate losing his mind after his wife died. Lila walked stiffly, chin up, but Boone could see the tremor in her hands. Inside the dry goods store, the owner, Mr. Harlan, didn't greet them, didn't meet Lila's eyes. "What can I get you, Tate?" he asked, voice flat as cold iron. "Flour, salt, lamp oil," Boone said, "and boots for the lady." Harlan blinked as if he wasn't sure he'd heard right. "You want me to size her?" "She's a person," Boone said with quiet force. "Not a shadow. Talk to her." Harlan cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Fine. What size you wear, miss?" Lila swallowed. 7. He boxed up the boots with a mutter. "That'll be 63 cents. Boone placed the coins on the counter. Harlan placed the boots without letting their fingers touch. On the way out, a woman standing near the door clasped her shawl tighter. "Poor thing," she whispered to her friend. "Why must that be your concern?" the friend snapped. "She got herself bought, didn't she?" Lila flinched. Boone didn't, but something in him hardened in a way she felt through the air between them. Boone helped her onto the horse. His hands brushed her waist only briefly, but she felt steady for the first time since stepping foot in town. As they turned toward home, Lila spoke without looking back. "Why do you defend me?" she asked softly. "You don't know me, Boone Tate. You don't know what kind of trouble I bring." He tugged the reins gently, guiding the horse around a frozen rut. "Don't have to know you didn't deserve that auction," he said, "or the people who put you there." "But you're paying the price," she whispered. He looked straight ahead. The mountains rose like steel behind the snowfall, the wind whistling around their peaks. "Lila," he said at last, "I've been paying a price a long time. None of it had anything to do with you." The words settled into the space between them, deep, warm, old-scarred truth. And for the first time, she believed him. Snow fell again that night, not wild like the storm that nearly killed her, but soft, like a warning whispered against the windows. Boone lit the lamps one by one. Lila worked quietly beside him, folding blankets, sweeping corners, the motions practiced but still cautious, like she wasn't sure the cabin allowed softness. When her hand brushed his as she passed him a tin of matches, she froze. So did he. Just a touch, barely more than breath. But it lingered. Boone looked away first, jaw working as if he'd bitten down on words he didn't trust himself to say. Lila felt heat rise under her skin, unexpected, unwelcome, impossible to ignore. It had been years since anyone had touched her without ownership in the gesture. She didn't know what to do with kindness. Boone didn't know what to do with wanting. The fire snapped, more alive than the room dared to be. Lila sat near it, boots off, her toes stretched toward the heat. Boone worked at the table behind her, sorting tools he'd already sorted twice. Neither of them mentioned town. The stares, the whispers, the insult of being treated like a story someone could twist however they pleased, but it hung between them anyway. At last, Boone spoke. "You did good today," he said. She turned slightly. "All I did was walk." "No, you held your head up." His voice softened. "Most folks would have hidden behind me." Lila stared into the fire. "I've been hiding my whole life." He took in a slow breath, one she heard even over the crackling wood. "You don't have to in my home." She closed her eyes a moment. "That's what scares me," she whispered. Boone shifted behind her. She heard his boots scrape the floorboards, then stop halfway, like he'd thought better of coming closer. "You think I'll hurt you?" he asked quietly. "No," she said. "Too fast, too honest." "That's not the fear." He swallowed. The sound was soft, almost shy. "Then what is?" She turned to him fully. The firelight made shadows dance across the planes of his face, highlighting every scar, every line carved by grief and years of loneliness, and she said the only truth she had: that you'll care. Boone's breath left him in one low exhale, like she had reached inside his ribs and touched something he hadn't expected to feel again. "I ain't good at that anymore," he murmured. "I don't need you to be good at it," she said. "I just need you to be honest." Their eyes held, his storm gray, hers warm and wary. The quiet between them felt like the first moment before lightning strikes. He moved without thinking, slow, deliberate, like a man walking toward something he didn't trust but desperately wanted. He crouched beside her, close enough that she felt the heat of his body, the cinnamon scent of wood smoke caught in his clothes. "Truth is," his voice dropped, "I haven't cared about much since my wife passed, haven't wanted to. Didn't think I could." Lila turned her face toward him, her breath trembling just a little. "And now," she whispered. His hand lifted inches, stopped, hovered, then gently brushed a curl from her cheek. Just one touch. Careful. Reverent. Now I don't know how to stop. Lila's breath hitched, not from fear, but from recognition. It had been so long since someone touched her with gentleness instead of claim. She leaned into his hand, barely, just enough to say, "Yes, I feel it too." Boone closed his eyes like the moment heard in the most beautiful way. They didn't kiss. Not yet. But the air changed. The space between them shrank, warm and fragile like a flame, learning how to burn again. Boone cleared his throat and stood, voice rough as gravel. "You should get some rest," he said. "So should you." He nodded once. Neither moved. Finally, he stepped away, slow and reluctant. "Good night, Lila." Her voice followed him like a soft ribbon in the dark. "Good night, Boone." He lay awake long after she settled onto the bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering how a woman who arrived in a storm of chaos somehow quieted one inside him he didn't know he'd been living with. And Lila, curled beneath the blankets he'd given her, let herself whisper the tiniest truth into the dark. "I'm afraid of you, Boone Tate, and not for the reasons you think." The fire cracked softly in answer. Boone found Lila on the porch the next morning, standing with her palms wrapped around a tin cup. The sun was barely above the ridge, but she looked as if she had been awake for hours. He leaned on the doorway, watching her quietly. "Didn't sleep?" he asked. She smiled without turning. "Maybe a little, but it's the first morning I've had in years where I didn't wake up afraid." That admission punched the breath out of him more than any blow ever had. Lila stepped down into the yard, letting the wind catch her hair. She didn't look like a woman running anymore. For the first time, she looked like a woman imagining. "I used to wonder," she said softly, "if there was a place where a person like me could start again, not as property, but as someone who mattered." Boone's chest tightened. "You do matter," he said. She turned then, really turned, her eyes catching the light in a way that made his heart stumble. "You don't have to say things like that, Boone." "I ain't saying it to be kind," he said quietly. "I'm saying it because it's true." A silence bloomed between them, soft and warm. Lila looked down at her hands. "When you speak to me like that, it feels like my heart remembers something it forgot, like it's been asleep." His voice dropped. "Maybe it's waking up." For a moment, the world felt impossibly gentle. Then Lila's expression shifted, something tightening beneath her ribs. She glanced toward the road. You ever think trouble forgets how to find us? No, Boone said. Trouble's got a long memory. And as if the words summoned it, the air changed. The horses in the corral lifted their heads. A crow launched from the fence. The wind stilled just enough to make her breath catch. Boone's hand moved instinctively to the small of her back. "Get behind me," he murmured. "Boone." He didn't answer. A rider appeared at the far end of the road, moving slow, deliberate, smug. Lila's blood turned to ice. Doyle Mercer. The man who had dragged her by the wrist, who had made promises in that liquor-soaked back room, who had spat in her face when she whispered, "Please don't hurt me." Her fingers trembled. Boone felt it. "It's all right," he whispered. "I'm here." Her voice was barely a breath. "He came for me." Boone stepped forward. Then he made his last mistake. Doyle reined in his horse at the gate, lips curling into a smile that had no warmth. "Well now," he drawled, "look what Boone Tate picked up and hauled home." Boone didn't blink. "State your business." "Oh, my business," Doyle said, spitting into the dirt. "My business is that the girl behind you belongs to me." Lila flinched. Boone didn't. "You don't own anybody," Boone said. "Funny," Doyle said. "That ain't how the law reads." "That ain't how I read." Doyle's eyes narrowed, sliding toward Lila. "You run off thinking you'd be free? You cost me money, girl." Boone stepped in front of her so fast, Doyle blinked. "Call her girl again," he said softly, "and see what happens." Doyle laughed. "Listen to you. Limping around like you got something to prove." Boone's jaw flexed. "You come onto my land again," Boone said. "You won't leave upright." "Is that a threat?" "No," Boone said. "It's a promise." Doyle's face twisted, but something in Boone's eyes made him hesitate. He jerked the reins. "This ain't over," he snapped. "You're meddling in business too big for you." Boone stepped closer, voice deadly calm. "You bother her again, and business won't even be a memory." Doyle rode off, rage simmering under his breath. When the dust settled, Lila's legs folded beneath her. Boone caught her before she hit the porch boards. "Easy now, I got you." Her hands clung to his shirt. "He won't stop." "I know. You'll get hurt." Boone lifted her chin so she had to see him. "Some things," he whispered, "are worth bleeding for." Her heart leapt, the world collapsing to the space between them. "I don't want you hurt because of me," she said. He shook his head. "I ain't hurt, Lila, not anymore." Their foreheads brushed, and in that moment she knew trouble had found her again. But this time, so had something else, something stronger, something like home. The sun slipped low behind the ridge, casting the valley in a cold, brittle orange that was swallowed quickly by the coming night. Lila stood at the wash basin, wringing out a cloth, warm water dripping along her wrists. Boone leaned on the counter beside her, his shoulder brushing hers each time he shifted. They didn't speak. They didn't have to. Something had changed on that porch, not spoken aloud but understood. The cabin felt smaller in the best way, as if the air itself wrapped them closer. Boone handed her a bowl. "Stew's done," she smiled. "You made enough for 3 men," he shrugged. "Been a while since I cooked for company." "You don't mind?" His eyes lingered on her longer than before. "No, I don't mind." A warmth spread through her chest. For the first time in her life, a man's tenderness didn't scare her. Later, as the fire cracked low, Lila found herself tracing the grain of Boone's wooden table, the grooves worn by years of solitude and quiet pain. She looked toward him, sitting in the rocker, sharpening a knife, the rhythm soft and thoughtful. His leg ached. She could see it even when he hit it well. "You should rest," she murmured. He paused. "I will. You always say that, and one day I'll mean it." She crossed the room before she realized she'd moved. Her fingers brushed his hand, just lightly. Boone froze. "Why are you looking at me like that?" he asked, voice low. "Like what?" "Like you see something worth staying for." She swallowed. "I do." His breath hitched. The smallest break in a man too used to holding the world together with nothing but grit. "Lila," he whispered, but just as the warmth sparked between them, a sound broke it, not hooves, not voices, a distant metallic clink. Boone stiffened immediately. "That's a rifle being cocked," he said. The blood drained from Lila's face. Boone moved fast, faster than she'd ever seen him move despite the limp. He grabbed the lamp and snuffed the flame. The cabin fell into a dim amber glow from the fire. "Get to the back room," he said. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "I'm not leaving you. Lila, I'm not hiding again. Not from that man." Boone stared at her, and something in her eyes made him nod. He positioned her behind the big wooden pillar beside the hearth, a place that would shield her from the window but keep her near him. Outside, boots crunched softly in the dirt. A shadow passed the window, then another. Lila's knees trembled. Boone raised his rifle and said in a low whisper, "Doyle brought friends." A voice rang out. "Boone Tate, come outside and bring the girl with you." Lila recoiled. "He really came for me." "No," Boone said fiercely. "He came because he ain't used to losing." Boone moved toward the window and angled himself carefully. "Get ready." 4. Before she could finish, a gunshot exploded through the quiet. Glass shattered, wood splintered. Lila screamed and dropped to the floor. Boone fired back instantly. "Stay down," he shouted. Outside, laughter echoed through the dark. Doyle's men weren't drunk. They were confident. A second shot hit the doorframe. Boone grunted, breath hissing through his teeth. He crouched lower, firing again. "Boone, your leg!" "I'm all right!" But she saw the truth. He was fighting with everything he had, and it wasn't enough. There were too many. 5, maybe 6. Doyle's voice slithered through the dark. "You can't keep her, Tate. She's worth too much coin, much more than you paid." Lila's hands clenched. His words cut deeper than any blade. Boone roared back, "She ain't your property." Another shot. Another burst of wood. Lila scrambled toward him, wrapping her hand around his arm. "Boone, if you get shot." "I ain't leaving you," he gasped. "Don't ask me to." He shifted positions, grimacing as pain shot up his leg. His breathing tightened, controlled but strained. Lila pressed her forehead against his. "Let me help," she whispered. He closed his eyes as if the touch alone steadied him. "You being here," he said, voice cracking, "that's help enough." Her heart broke open. Outside, Doyle snarled, "Last chance, Tate. Give her up or we take her off your corpse." Boone aimed toward the sound, fury sharpening every line of his face. "I'll die before I hand her to you." Lila's breath caught, and Doyle's laugh turned cold. "Then we'll get to dig a hole tonight." He gave the signal, boots stamped, metal clanged, more rifles cocked. The attack was seconds away. Boone braced himself. Lila rose beside him despite his protest. "Lila, no." "I'm not hiding," she whispered, gripping his hand. "Not while they try to take the only good thing that's ever happened to me." His chest tightened. He couldn't answer, didn't have the breath. Another kick. The hinges groaned. Doyle yelled, "Break it open." Boone lifted his rifle. Lila steadied his shoulder. Their hearts pounded as one. And the door cracked. The door shuddered again. Wood cracked. Dust drifted from the rafters. Boone braced his back against the table, rifle raised, breath steady but strained. Lila pressed herself beside him, her hand gripping his sleeve, refusing to leave him to fight alone. "Lila," he whispered, half pleading, half proud. "I'm not hiding," she said, voice trembling with courage, stronger than her fear. Not while they try to take the only good thing that's ever happened to me." His chest tightened. He couldn't answer. Didn't have the breath. Another kick. The hinges groaned. Doyle's voice. "Move aside, boys. This one's mine." Boone fired back. One clean shot, and the man closest to him collapsed with a scream. Lila ducked behind the beam, heart hammering. Another man stormed through the doorway, only for Boone to slam the butt of his rifle into his jaw. The man dropped unconscious. Doyle laughed through the smoke. "You're getting slow, Tate." Boone limped sideways, pain shooting down his bad leg, but he fired again. The bullet grazed Doyle's coat, close but not enough. Doyle raised his revolver. Lila screamed, "Boone!" Boone turned toward her instead of the gun. It saved his life. Doyle fired, and the bullet missed Boone by a breath as he threw himself sideways. The shot struck the mantel behind him. Doyle cursed and charged. Boone didn't have time to reload. They crashed into each other, grappling. Boone's strength against Doyle's size. Doyle got on top, pressing his forearm into Boone's throat. Boone's face reddened. His legs spasmed violently from the pressure. Lila grabbed the fallen revolver, hands rattling, breath shaking. "Lila, don't!" Boone choked. Doyle's eyes widened. "You wouldn't." Lila's hands trembled so hard she could barely aim, but she didn't look away. "I said, let him go." Doyle sneered. "You ain't got it in you." And that was the last mistake he ever made. Boone shoved upward with the last of his strength, knocking Doyle off balance. Lila fired. The bullet struck the wood beside Doyle's head. The warning shot Boone would have given too. Doyle froze. She cocked the hammer again. "Next one goes where Boone tells me," she whispered. Boone hauled himself to his knees, chest heaving. "Get out," he rasped. Doyle glared, then spat blood onto the floor. "You'll regret this," he hissed. Boone reached for Lila's hand, steadied her aim with his own fingers, and whispered, "No, Doyle. You're the one running tonight." Doyle staggered backward, out the door, holding his wounded pride. His remaining men dragged him away into the dark. And finally, the valley fell quiet. The revolver slipped from Lila's fingers. Her knees gave out. Boone caught her before she hit the floor, pulling her against him with a desperate, shaking breath. "It's over," she whispered into his shoulder. His voice broke, raw, honest, unguarded. "Because of you." He slid down with her onto the floor, the firelight flickering over them both. "You could have been killed," she murmured. "You saved my life." "You saved mine first." His forehead touched hers, breath warm, trembling. "Lila." Her fingers pressed to his cheek. "What?" "I ain't felt alive in years, not until you walked into my cabin, not until tonight, not until—" His voice cracked. He swallowed hard. Then his confession fell like a truth too heavy to hold back. "You're the only thing that's made me want to stay in this world." Her tears fell instantly. She cradled his face with both hands. "Boone Tate, I never thought I'd know this kind of safety, or this kind of—" She hesitated, breath shaking. "Hope." He pulled her closer, gentle but desperate, as if afraid she'd vanish if he loosened his grip. Their lips brushed, soft, hesitant, a tremble of survival turning into want. Then she kissed him again, slow, certain, claiming the life she was choosing. He lifted her into his arms, one step, then another, toward the bedroom door. The fire behind them dipped low as Boone whispered, "I'll be gentle." Her breath trembled. "So will I." The door closed softly, and the storm that lived inside both of them finally broke, not with pain, but with two people learning what it felt like to be wanted, to be chosen, to be free. 3 months passed, the valley thawed, the creek softened, and Boone Tate's cabin, once silent, now hummed with life. Lila stood on the porch touching the sprouting herbs she planted in old tin cans. Boone hammered a new fence post, pausing often to look her way. When she caught him staring, he flushed like a schoolboy. "You're supposed to be working," she teased. "I am working," he said, "just on something worth keeping." She stepped off the porch and crossed to him. His limp was still there, but lighter. Her smile was still soft but stronger. He wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her close with the kind of tenderness that belonged only to men who'd once forgotten how to feel. "You happy?" he asked. She nodded against his chest. "With you, I finally am." He breathed out slow, like he'd been waiting his whole life to hear that. Boone kissed the top of her head. "Well then," he whispered, "so am I." And in the quiet valley, beneath the warm spring sky, two people once broken learned they could build a life, not from fear, not from survival, but from the slow, steady kind of love that takes root and never lets go. If this love story touched your heart, show some love back, like the video and subscribe for more. Tell me in the comments, should their love story continue or end with mystery?